I worked in a children's hospital as a casual nurse for a year. That place was definitely haunted. I had children's toys start moving by themselves a few times. They can't all have faulty wiring, and it was always at night. On each ward there was a playroom, and a button to press for assistance in there. The amount of times at night that a playroom assistance buzzer would go off without anyone being there was interesting, to say the least. One night, I was working the night shift again with a nurse who I had worked with previously. She was really great to work with, loved her job, friendly and reliable. The manager told us we needed to clean up the storeroom because it was messy. My friend decided she would do it because she knew where everything belonged. About 10 minutes after she had gone in, we could hear banging and screaming. We ran down to get her, and we tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. At this point, she was screaming for help, so I ran to grab the manager who had the key. As we started to run back down the corridor, she managed to get it open herself. She sprinted down the hallway past us and straight out of the ward. From what I heard, she had quit the next day. I asked a couple of the other nurses what happened, and they said she felt something grab her leg. The lights turned off and she couldn't open the door. I also worked for a while as a jail nurse. This happened when I was on duty one night a few months ago. When someone escapes, or there's the threat of an escape, they call helicopters in to survey the jail grounds from the air. At about 2 a.m., I could hear helicopters flying overhead, with no radio announcement or phone call to tell us what was going on. I stepped outside to see if I could see where exactly they were headed. I could hear the helicopter flying around in the distance, so I started to wonder if maybe they were just doing a flying exercise. My stomach dropped when I heard them turn around and start to head back my way again. I ran back inside and shut the door just in case there was an escapee that was in my area. The helicopters flew around for about an hour, and then stopped entirely. During that time, we were each required to radio in and state our whereabouts. At around 5 a.m. that night, the senior, basically the guy who runs the jail overnight, came in and asked me if I had heard anything strange during the night coming from the roof. I replied no, and asked him why. Apparently, a few inmates had heard some strange noises coming from above them, as if someone was walking heavily across the roof and screaming. When the night senior went to investigate, he reported seeing a bipedal shadow standing on the roof. When he yelled and shone his torch towards the roof, it ran to the opposite side and jumped off the 2-story building. Being a maximum security jail, it is of course incredibly difficult for a member of the public to get in. There were 5 officers on and 1 nurse, me, working that night, and each of them were accounted for at that time. There were no inmates missing either. There was also no ladder or easy method for this person to get on the roof. They must have had climbing gear to get up there, yet the shadow did not appear to have a bag, nor was any equipment found. I won't be mentioning names and places in this story because it involves a deployment that happened relatively recently. I will say that it was 3 years ago, somewhere in the Pacific. I was on my final sea tour on a submarine, getting ready to come home before crew rotation. I was doing roves, checking valve positions and flow meters, when I heard an almighty banging noise. I wasn't the only one that heard it, since my senior chief at the time yelled down from the upper level to investigate. I did a quick rove of the lower level and bilge. Nothing. I reported this to the SC, and he sent me to go check the engine room along with some of the off-duty nukes. There's this tunnel that goes through the ship above the reactor compartment, and there's this little 1x1 lead glass window to see down into it. I took a glance, because I like looking at the cool nuke stuff, and I nearly lost it when I saw someone down in there staring at one of the big steam generators. I started yelling, and we ended up having to kill primary propulsion so we could go down into the room. The reactor got partially scrammed, which also kills all non-essential power. There was only 2 little red lights in that room, amongst 20 to 40 foot containers, pumps, and valves. We searched around the area for a solid 20 minutes with flashlights. In the end, we couldn't find a thing. At this point, I was well and royally spooked. I said to the senior, "I know I saw a person in here." The rest of my rove went by uneventfully, and I got relieved for the night. I forgot about it until a few days later. When we pulled into port, as we rotated crews, someone found a set of coveralls that belonged to someone that died on the ship a few years previously. "Where'd you find it?" I asked. "Reactor compartment." If I can't get a different ship when it comes time to renew my contract and I have to go out to sea again, I'm just getting out of the Navy. I used to work in a retail store that had had some accidents. Come to think of it, accidents were common. I worked there for about 2 years, and 5 months in, I was on my lunch break having a smoke when a middle-aged lady walked up to me. She asked about a guy, Danny. I told her, "I don't know a Danny," and she walked off into the store. I didn't see her after that, until about 6 months later. She asked again about Danny. It was the exact same conversation, and she walked off once again into the store. I asked my manager, who had been there since 2006, and she mentioned that a guy named Daniel was killed in a PLE, that's powerlifting equipment, accident some time ago. His wife committed suicide a day after the funeral. Apparently, some of my coworkers have met her too. She usually comes around 11 or midnight if someone is alone and on a smoke break. It's weird because she didn't seem like a ghost to me, just a normal person. We had a PLE machine. I'm not sure if it was the one that caused the accident, but it was a power jack, basically an overpowered pallet jack. In any case, pretty much everyone is convinced that it's cursed or haunted, so lovingly they named it Christine. I've used it multiple times and can vouch that the thing has a mind of its own. I was pulling stock out of the midnight truck alone. The driver had to take a piss, and when backing it up, it just decided it didn't want to stop and ended up pinning me against one of the steel shelving units. It was persistent in keeping me there, but I eventually got it to go forward. The machine has been inspected numerous times and it always comes back clean. The store's been too lazy and cheap to buy a new one. Now for some more miscellaneous events around the store. One late night I was stocking in the fruit aisle. There wasn't a single other soul in the building when I heard somebody walking behind me. I looked, and nobody was there. I went to return to my work when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and there was still no one. Another time, at about 10 p.m., I was working in fruits and juices again when I heard what I can only describe as a loud roar or scream. There were a few customers who heard it and freaked out. It barely even sounded like a person. I darted to where it came from, and there was nothing but water and soda sitting on their shelves. I asked the manager about it, and she said, "Oh, that. It happens, just ignore it." I talked to some of my coworkers about this. They don't believe in ghosts, really, but even they said they think the place is bad. I work as a security guard, and this one night, I was on the night shift at a business complex. I finished my patrol of the multi-level parking lot, and just as I was about to return to my booth, I could hear rapid footsteps several meters behind me. Startled, I quickly turned back and shone my flashlight, only to see nobody there. I radioed the chief who was at the surveillance monitors. Possible trespasser at parking lot, ground floor, proceeding to investigate. The chief assured me that he could see nothing on the infrared cameras, except for me getting startled, but he gave me the go-ahead anyway. I inspected the ground floor and found nothing. I went one floor up, shining my flashlight here and there, when suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart behind a support beam. "Parking lot, floor 1. See anything, Chief?" He said the camera kept flickering and disconnecting. I was starting to get creeped out. I walked a few paces closer to the support beam. "Anyone there?" The chief suddenly radioed me with a trembling voice. Stand down, get out of there now." I asked what was wrong, completely freaking out at this point. He said, "Just get the hell out of there." I complied and ran back to the ground floor, where I could see the chief waiting with a taser in his hand. I asked, "So are we going to call the cops, or what? What was up there?" The chief said that during the few flickers on the monitor, he caught a glimpse of something hunched over behind the support beam, as it was taller than the ceiling. Humanoid in general outline, but with abnormally long arms and short legs. Almost like a gorilla, but a lot skinnier. The recording file was corrupted. He called the cops, saying that some sort of large animal had wandered in, because he knew they wouldn't believe him if he told them what he had seen. Animal control arrived with nets and other tools for subduing animals. We escorted them to where it was last seen, but, of course, there were no traces of it anywhere. It's as if it had just vanished. We've never told anyone else about this. I work in a hospital. Actually, I'm there right now. I've seen and experienced some spooky things in the past, but never anything really X-worthy. Well, except for this. I was drawing blood from a patient. Her husband was an old man, asleep in the chair at her bedside. The patient was out cold, in a medical coma. I filled the syringe. The blood was thick and clotty. Whatever, it's ICU, so it wasn't my call to reject it. I popped a tourniquet, pulled the needle, and stood up. I turned to my tray to grab the tube to transfer blood into, when reflected in the mirror above the sink, just in my peripheral, I could see the patient standing. I quickly turned to get her back into bed, since patients aren't supposed to be up. It's a fall risk. It never crossed my mind that she was supposed to be in a coma. She hadn't moved. She was still in her bed where I'd last seen her. I got a call later that day from Donor Alliance asking for samples on that patient. I said, "Oh, she passed? That's a shame, I saw her earlier." It wasn't until later that night that I put the pieces together. I'm still a little creeped out by the mirrors in those rooms.